we want to focus mostly at least 50 minutes of this time on demoing for you all the Pcard system itself, and then spare 30 minutes for all your questions. So like Jason said, hold off your questions till the end. And I think, Sherry, you want to get started?
Sure. So one of the housekeeping things, if anybody needs water or restrooms, go out those doors in the back, go straight through the second set of doors, and men's is on the right, women's is on the left, and water fountain right between the two. So please feel free to get up if you need to use the facilities. So the solution here, as Radha said, is .NET based. It's a roles-based system, so that means you can assign different roles. For example, a pay card holder is the person who's entering the transactions. The supervisor role is inherited automatically from the system that we're connecting to, which is Timekeep at present, but for a more robust solution, that could be Oaks. That's also how we're getting the list of the users that we're allowed to create as pay card holders. We created a special role so that Jason's OBM team could go in as auditors and look at things. We have a budget control role, or the budget role is the one who, budget coordinator is the role that's able to just view only records so that you can see what's coming in and keep track of information. We have emails that are set up so that as different states occur in the system, supervisors might get emailed, the fiscal team might get emailed that it's time to reconcile the statement. The pay card holder might get email to let them know that their transaction has moved forward in the life cycle, and they also have screens that they can look at that would let them see what the state of the record is. In the case that a supervisor does not approve or reject the pay card within 2 business days, the system will send an escalation notice that goes both to the pay card holder and its supervisor. And in the system, the supervisor has the ability to delegate their functionality as a supervisor if they know that they'll be out, for example, on vacation. We set the system up so that within any office, supervisors that are peers or above the level of supervisor who would be doing the approving can also do the approval of the pay card transaction or the rejection if they should need to do so. So without further ado, I will log in here. Currently, this is a Novell ID, but that can be changed to the SUID. Oh, thank you, sorry. Yeah. Magic third time is the charm. All right. So here on the screen, I've logged in. I am simply a pay card holder. If I had other roles, which I do, there's a section here called Select a Role. And so if I want to go in as a different role, I would select it. In this case, my other role is an admin role, which a user cannot select. It's the highest power role. It's the one that does the work within the system that could do things like set a pay card shutoff date, or not a pay card shutoff date, but a system date that says from this date forward, transactions can't be approved. So for example, you guys are coming up on the fiscal year end, and I think May 13th might be, or June 13th might be your magic date. So the admin would go in and set that date so that no more pay cards could go forward through the life cycle. All right. I can save records at any time, and if I want to then go in and work with the record, I've got it set at kind of a high scale. Oops, don't mind my water there. I've got it set at a high scale so that hopefully you guys can see. From where you're sitting, is that a, can you read that information? Okay. So I go into a record to edit it. Thank you, Radha. Apparently I'm going to have a slow system today. So information you see at the top of the screen is inherited based on my information that's coming from the Timekeep system. But as you can see, my SUID is there, The system automatically knows who my supervisor is. And if the roles said that I could belong to more than one office, because some of you do purchase from more than one department or team, I would select who I'm making that purchase for, and it would be the admin role that sets up who has that permission. In this case, I've already pre-filled a lot of information. We don't really need to go field by field. Some of the key features of the system are, as I begin entering information, the system will remember it. So in this case, I've built two suppliers previously, so the system recognized I have files, fans, and phones, and I also have OBM demo. If I pick a different provider, then the system will fill in whatever information I've previously entered for the contact and the phone number. Change this back. The system has a validation process so that I can make sure that all the information is necessary, that all the information that's required is here. And when it finishes the validation, it's going to either give me basically thumbs up or thumbs down. Under the validation results here, about 2/3 of the way down, it's basically telling me that I have not yet entered the purchase amount, and that's the one thing I have to correct. Other fields are set up to have lookup lists. When you start each fiscal year, your speed chart is going to be blank, but as you enter your valid speed charts, the system is going to allow you to select from them in the future. We set the OBM account codes to display about, I want to say, 10 numbers to begin with, some of the universal numbers for our office, and then it will expand as I enter more of those numbers. If I don't know the number off the top of my head, I can go look up the number that I want. So that opens a whole new screen for that. You will, however, still have to type the information. So once I know the number, I would simply type it in here. Since the only field that's missing right now is the amount, I'm going to enter an amount. You'll see a field to the right that is in red. If I were doing a return, I would be entering a return amount rather than a purchase amount. Save my record here. And at the bottom are the attachments. So if you are going to be submitting this, you also need to have at least one attachment. Sometimes perhaps the purchase has more than one receipt and you're submitting it all as one record. I would just do multiple attachments then. I'm going to close the validation results I had displayed, and then I'm going to ask the system to revalidate for me. I should get a thumbs up. So in green, it's saying all transaction validations have passed. Now I'm going to the action stage, and as a pay card holder, the only option that I have is to submit it for approval. So I'm going to tell the system I do indeed want to submit it for approval. And that record has now gone to my supervisor. If I wanted to confirm that, I could go to my In Process tab here, and I will see all records that are in flight, whether it's a new record, whether it's been submitted to my supervisor, whether Fiscal has already approved it, and that's where the record is here. This record right here, files, fans, and phones, is the one that I just worked with. And from this screen, I could say I wanted to view it. You probably can't see very well, but it's a little binocular icon there. And now I'm in a view-only mode, and I'm confirming. Oops. Sorry, I grabbed my demo for a return. But it will show you the information that belongs to the record that you're looking at. When I did my submission, it did send my supervisor an email, or I should say it will. We have an hourly process that looks at the records for the supervisor, says, do you have a new transaction that has been submitted for your approval? And if so, it's going to generate an email to them. Now, the next function that I'm going to do does not really exist in production, but it's how I'm able to demonstrate different roles. So bear with me for a second here, as I pretend I am my supervisor. Now, the system is set that it is not to allow me to approve my own records. So, for example, if I'm both a supervisor and a pay card holder, I will not be able to approve my own transaction. Likewise, if I'm a fiscal team member and I also have the pay card role, I will not be able to approve my own transaction. if I type the right ID. And in the upper right corner, you can see that I'm now pretending that I'm somebody else. Again, this function does not exist in production. It's simply so that we could test and so that we can do things like demonstrations here. So now as my supervisor, nothing tells you that he's a supervisor because right now he doesn't have any roles other than being a supervisor. Thank you. There we go. Unless, of course, I forgot during my setup. Okay, so I did give him the fiscal role so that I can keep going with this demo. All right, but I do want him to be fiscal. And we're going to take a look at this record here. This one that I just submitted was the 529 record, files, fans, and phones. You can see the description. There are half a dozen fields here that we have to help to make it easier to see what record we're working with. And as a supervisor, I'm going to say that I want to edit this record. And in a supervisor view, notice how all things are grayed out. That means I can view them, but I can't edit them. So whatever my protocol is for reviewing this record to make sure that it's valid, I will do those steps. For example, perhaps I'm supposed to always look at the receipt and make sure that the receipt matches the information that I'm seeing here. And so it's going to open my little notepad mock receipt. I will close that now. So we'll pretend that I've done my due diligence as a supervisor. And now I'm going to action this record to its next stage in the life cycle. As a supervisor, I have the ability both to approve the record, or if I felt something was wrong, I could reject the record. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to approve it. When I approve, I don't have to write a comment if I reject it. With the current rules, I do have to enter a comment. And I will submit it to the next stage of the life cycle. So that record from 529 has vanished from my supervisory queue, and I'm left with older records that I have not yet worked. And since some of these are older, like 521, as a supervisor, I already got a notice that told me, hey, these are more than 2 days delinquent. And as a supervisor, when I approved that record on an hourly batch process, the fiscal team also received that email that let them know that there was something there to be reviewed. Now, because I've given my supervisor the fiscal role to make this demo easier, now he's looking at records from a fiscal perspective. And if it's in the work queue, then it means it's a record that they need to work. Anything that's on the history tab has reached the terminal stage of the life cycle for fiscal. So that means that it's been reconciled, and it has an OAKS ID, and it has an OAKS voucher ID, or an OAKS date. Right, so now from a fiscal perspective, we're going to say that we want to edit that same record. So again, I will select the edit icon. And the system currently doesn't have an interface with OAKS. So the steps that we're about to do are manual. When we began the project, we did envision a connection with OAKS, so that would be a future enhancement. So in this case, as the fiscal team, I have a few fields that are editable for me based on the requirements we had elicited. One of those, perhaps I realized that the speed chart number is not quite right. I can either choose to change that speed chart, or I could choose to reject the record and give a rejection reason of that's not the speed chart code that you should have chosen for this record. And the second field I'm permitted to edit is this OBM account code. So assuming that I like everything that I see here, since I've changed the information, I'm going to go ahead and save it. I could run validation just to make sure that the system thinks everything is good. In this case, it's giving me an error message that's related to the terminal stage of the life cycle. The way we developed the system, since we don't yet have that connection with OAKS, is right now I would be either saying that I have reconciled this. Let's see. So the reconciliation stage will say, yes, I finished my reconciliation. And I'm going to save that. I'm going to return to my work queue so that you can see how this record is called out. Previously, it was black text. Now it's red text. That's a visual cue for the fiscal team that they have already worked this record. And tomorrow, they should go in, or the day after, and see whether they have Oaks information, whether Oaks has done its approval, and whether it's assigned the voucher ID and what the date is. Then they would return to this record, and they would finish the life cycle. So we're going to assume that that has happened. I'm going to edit the record. I'm going to go to the, oops, no, sorry, sequence here. Okay, so since I am saying that I've finished the reconciliation and I'm pretending I have the information now from Oaks, whatever the voucher ID is, I would enter the voucher ID, and then from the calendar, I can select whatever date I say I've got that validation. I'm going to save the record. Now when I run the validation, I should get a thumbs up. So there we go, validation results in green. All transactions have passed. And at this point, I can say that I'm approving the purchase, which is going to send it to the final stage of the life cycle. So that red record from 5/29 is no longer on my screen. And now this final phones and fans record is on my history screen. And again, if I chose to look at it, I would simply choose that binocular icon at the very end there. Now, let's move on to the budget coordinator role. I'm going to change my login again, this magic that occurs only in demos and testing. This is a view-only screen, which contains even more fields than other views. So you would also be seeing, if this were the end of the life cycle, you'd see the Oaks voucher ID and you would see the Oaks paid date. So for purposes of the user acceptance testing that we did, there are a number of records that are here for the budget coordinator. And if I am the budget coordinator for more than one area, it's why you're seeing records, for example, fiscal information services, and there may be other ones that we gave during our testing. If I wanted to filter any of these fields, I would simply enter a value at the very top. So let's just say I want to look only at fiscal. I would tell the filter that I either want it to start with, contains, or any other value. There are a dozen in that list there, and I will say it contains that value. And now my records are filtered only to fiscal and monitoring. Let's say that I'm not going to have an internet connection, and I'm going to want to look at this information when I'm waiting for a meeting to begin. I could say I wanted to generate a report, and again, it's hard to see here on the screen, but there's a tiny button for an Excel symbol. By clicking that, I am launching the process to create a report. And this report feature is available pretty much on every screen for every user. So whether I'm a budget coordinator, a pay card holder, a supervisor, fiscal, even the OBM auditor would have this ability. For the demo, we're just going to say we want to open that file. These are no-frills reports because, again, we were developing a system. We were trying to keep this within time constraints and budget constraints. But in the future, if there were more requirements for the information that needed to be in a report, then this Excel report could be altered. But again, bare bones, contains a dozen fields. For example, and you can see that it's filtered here. So the report generated based on the filter that I'd set within the application. So whatever other fields are scrolling off. So I think we chose every field that you were seeing on the screen. Now for the final set of features here, I'm going to go back in as an admin, so I'm going to toggle back to myself. All right, we temporarily lost our connection. All right, if my computer is being persnickety, we're just going to launch this again. All right, so as an admin, you'll see I've got several tabs here. I have the ability to maintain or add users. If I wanted to add a new user, I would select that option, and then I would start typing information looking for that user. We'll just do me here, even though I'm already in the system. I'm going to tell it to search for me. It's telling me that it found one record. If I chose something that was more universal, for example, maybe Smith as a last name, the system is going to look for every record in our timekeep database that contains the characters Smith. So I may not know the person's Nobel ID, but I will be able to find all the records that are out there and then pick the record that is the right one. I mentioned when we started that I could enter Pcard cutoff dates, and that's the point where the system will allow Pcard holders, supervisors, we can edit information, we can create records, but we can't send it forward in the life cycle. We have a set number of program areas for ODJFS. You would build this list based on what your program areas are. And then when I talked about emails, anything that's a real-time email, the admin could update. So for example, if you decide our users are complaining that we're getting way too many emails, we could then disable, the admin could disable that email. The batch emails are something that the Met has developed based on requirements that we had for these hourly notices, and those would require programming to change. Okay, the last one I'm going to demo for you is the supervisor who has the ability to delegate when they know that they're going to be out. Bear with me for the slow transaction here. Go back as my supervisor persona. The delegations, that would be the ability to say I'm going to be out of the office and I'm going to target another supervisor who's going to fill in for me. Then as a supervisor, if I'm, say, in a week-long conference, maybe I am still jumping in. I still have the ability to approve those transactions or reject them, but the supervisor that I've specifically delegated is going to receive that hourly email to let them know that there are new transactions to review, to approve or to reject. And we have this feature called inherited delegation. So let's just say I delegate it to Mehmet. Mehmet realizes he's going to be out, he delegates to Radha. So inherited delegations, if Radha were looking at her view as a supervisor, she would see that she inherited, let's see, the delegation from me because Mehmet delegated to her and I had delegated to Mehmet. So we tried to account for different scenarios that were out there. But again, if I'm in the office of the person who's doing a transaction, so for example in IS, So my supervisor can approve it, his supervisor could approve it, my manager's peers could approve it, and all the managers above them could approve it. So there's that flexibility. We heard that there are times where you have to run from person A to person B. This allows those other managers in a pinch to be able to assist. All right. That basically concludes the lightning fast demo for the folks that are here or the folks who are in the webinar. Are there any features or things that I talked about that you'd like to see again?
Oh, so I was just going to ask a question, and I apologize if I missed this at the beginning, but I might then pass it to Jason too.
Sure.
How do the records originate? Does somebody upload those every day?
We create them manually. So so in the scenario that I started with, I grabbed a record I'd already started. Give me a second. I'm going to go back as myself, and I'll show you that brand new transaction.
So the Pcard holder creates a
Would
record.
go in and they would create the transaction. So I would start that in the demo. I had pre-filled information.
Okay.
As a new transaction from a Pcard holder, I would just say I'm adding a new transaction.
Okay. I wonder if I can make this two-part then. Jason, do you have any vision of maybe making that more automated? When I was at the AG's office, we had a somewhat similar system, and we just had somebody basically in physical who daily ran the transactions that hit Oak that day, uploaded them, and then as a Pcard holder, it alerted you and said, hey, your transaction just hit Oak, make sure you...
So I wanted to point out that when we started this project, it was a two-phase project. The first one was the user interface, and the phase two was the back-end process to automate the vouchers directly into Oaks. But the way the bank transaction is how we understood, it's the bank who initiates the transaction into Oaks. So there was no way we so we have to use that transaction in our voucher. Am I?
Does that answer?
Make sense?
Well, I guess I'm thinking of originating the record. Once the Pcard transaction comes from the bank and hits Oaks, what we did was just upload all those transactions. So as a Pcard holder, you didn't necessarily have to originate the record. You would see on your queue, you have 3 records from transactions from maybe yesterday or 3 days ago that just hit Oaks. And then you just have to fill in the details.
And that's what they used to do. That's what they used to do. But the problem, for them to upload right now, that's the current process actually. Before we went live, that's what they used to do. Based on that transaction, they used to upload, but the front-end planning, the attachments and everything were either sitting on their desk or on email. So this is where you can see the flow of approval, or if your supervisor has approved it, any attachments, any invoices to that particular transaction.
So,
Yeah.
so what JFS wanted to solve, I think, is that lag time between swipe and when the transaction actually appears on Oaks. But I'm all but certain that an OBM requirement will be that transactions are pulled from Oaks and entered into the system, because there's too much opportunity for data error.
Yeah, I guess that's what I like about being able to pull it from Oaks, is we had all those transactions, all those dates that you couldn't mess up.
Yep.
So you guys are, I mean, you might have said this early on, I apologize. So you're using this instead of a payment card log?
Correct.
Okay, so they're not filling out a log, they're filling this out instead.
So for the people on the webinar, if you couldn't hear that, the question was basically, does this Pcard system replace the payment card log? And the answer is yes, this is in the equivalent of the payment card log.
I have one more question.
Sure.
How many payment card holders do you guys have?
So the question was how many payment card holders we have, and I think we've got about 90 to 110 at this point.
Okay, not a lot.
There's a question on the webinar, and that question is, as a supervisor, can you see the coding, the chart code coding?
You wouldn't have the ability to see the other values as a supervisor. With the way that it's coded right now, the supervisor doesn't have the ability to change it, but they would see whatever speed chart had been chosen. They would see the OBM account code that had been chosen, but it's only the fiscal role that currently has the ability to change those 2 fields.
I think it's important to note that JFS requires use of speed charts, whereas many, if not most other agencies, they may use speed charts, but it's, there are a lot of cases where you know, the chart fields can be entered individually, and so that certainly would be, a requirement.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. Yeah, that's it, I think. So how do you train your card holders when you get new ones coming up?
So right now, Danielle, the trainer, has created has created a document. Give me just a second here.
So that's your training department?
Fiscal has a training coordinator who initiated, before go live, we did a demo for all the pay card holders and
Right.
their supervisors.
Right.
And then
I'm just wondering
ongoing,
if you get new ones, that would be a lot.
if we have a job aid
Okay.
or a desk guy.
And as Mehmet is reminding me, the health option will navigate directly to that training guide that Danielle created.
So basically then, like a new card holder coming on, they would just do this? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, originally to kick off the project, we did have training sessions where the supervisors and the pay card holders were invited to participate.
Yeah.
And currently JFS, OBM does audit the pay card holders, so Jason and his team have access to the system. They create IDs for them and create it so that even the audit piece is easier for us and we don't have to pull everything out of the system at any time. Jason has visibility.
What about the state auditors? So you're applying the taxes and stuff to, this site or on the, I'm sorry if I missed that.
So the question that we just got from the audience was, how does OBM get to see this information? And the answer is we've got a role for the OBM auditors, and they have a view-only perspective, and they have the rights to see every pay card transaction.
No, we're talking about the auditor's office.
So when we do get audited in other systems from past experience, for example, if we do get audited on something like SharePoint, we do give temporary access to an auditor, to the system that they are auditing us on.
I'm sorry, but since Oak is the, book of record, do they still look to take SharePoint stuff that's not in Oak?
So Oaks is our book of record, it's our financial book of record. This pay card system or your SharePoint is mostly of the documents, the invoices, red signatures. That's what the pay card system is holding. The audit trail for approval of that pay card transaction.
But
Oaks
if you
doesn't have that.
If you go into a voucher and there's no attachment, we've been dinged for that, and I had to explain some things why there's no attachments or no comments or anything like that. So that's all I'm worried about.
Okay. So the question from the audience is being dinged because you submitted something, but you didn't have a voucher attached to it or information. And if I'm not quite answering your question, then we'll go back and revisit. But with the required fields that we have, if I don't have an attachment, the pay card holder won't be able to push this forward into the life cycle. Now, if Oak still requires an attachment, I mean, that's a separate question.
Yeah, so we ultimately want to look at interface options to take all the information that's in this system and move it over to Oaks. If that's not possible, then Renee, that's a great question. We'd have to address that with the auditor.
I'm sure, because we, had to explain three-way match like 5 times because there's no attachment or no approvals. So I'm just worried that if there's no approvals or attachments on the voucher, because the state auditors, not OBM auditors, they would know, but the auditor's office, I just want to.
Yep, we'll address it.
In your demo, you showed putting the account code in. Is the card holder putting the account code in? Is that a required field?
For our system, yes. So the question is, the account code, was that a required field, and did the user enter that? And the answer is yes, it is a required field. And yes, I, the user, am the one who entered that information.
Well, we would request that on your system that not be a required field for the card holder, because I got 300 card holders, and they don't know account codes from Apple.
I suspect that'll be a pretty broad request. around the state. I think JFS requires their cardholders to know a little bit more about the coding side of things than most agencies do.
Yeah,
And also,
You could even use
this,
like a default code too.
yeah.
Default account code, and then, I mean, that's what's all active.
that was one of the pain points that system brought to us during requirements, that there was too much back and forth because of the rejection of the account code. It's more like now they're teaching the Pcard holders to fresh and say, hey, you should know your basic account codes, and they're requiring them to put them.
I have another question from the webinar. Would each agency have administrators that would be able to assign agency roles and make updates to things like program area information, supplier name, etc.? And I would say that for the enterprise app, we'll have to take that under consideration and work with OBMIT to see, how much is necessary, and then, what we can do in the way of an agency admin role.
So the areas that you have listed, the different areas at ODJFS, are those consistent with like departments?
Yes.
Okay.
So the question for those online is, the program areas that I had listed, were those the equivalent of the departments? And yeah, so for us, the offices, so within our agency, we have information services, we have fiscal and budget fiscal and monitoring services, the unemployment insurance office, workforce development, the chief inspector's office, so it's that suite. So as an admin, and this is set up for OIS, the admin would be able to go in there if something got rearranged and suddenly there was a new office, then I would be able to add that office and add users for that office. Question in the back.
Is this, what JFS is using as a document repository, and if so, what's the retention on it? And for the enterprise solution, if we can't get the attachments to go from the .NET application to Oak, and as an enterprise we're using this as a document repository, will there be enough storage, and will it be able to cover the bond plus 3 years retention?
So the question from the audience is scalability of the solution for being able to hold and store attachments, and whether we will be able to meet, say, a 3-year retention policy, and what kind of cost, 23 years, okay. So what kind of cost would be associated with it? That would be a question for you guys, what the retention is. But within ODJFS, I think we said it was a 7-year requirement.
Yep, and we'll have to work with OBMIT but the system will have to store information for as long as the Oaks retention is. Since we're talking about, having information that today is in Oaks being stored outside potentially. Now, if everything can interface over, that's a whole different.
Question from the press?
For ODRC, for program areas, sort of have the same program areas, but we also have institutions, so sometimes with one site or something, where the cardholders put that in, just so that if we ever have to separate, I'm looking for something that's our administrator, I might want to look for the whole site instead of just all the programs.
Right.
Dispute, I didn't see anything in regards to dispute, because the cardholder is the one generally knows that there's an issue immediately. Is there anything on here for dispute, so that we know when it's sent or whatever, we need to get it in dispute?
So the question from the audience is whether we have a dispute function within the system. So when you immediately know that there's something wrong with the transaction, right now we don't have dispute as a value, but that could certainly be a status. So right now we have statuses like it's a new record, which means I've created it as a pay card holder, but I've not yet submitted it. When I submit it to my supervisor, that has a status. When the supervisor submits it to the fiscal team, that has a status. When the record is in the reconciliation process, that has a status. And when we say that it's at the final stage of its life cycle, it's approved. We have the rejected status. So the supervisor could have rejected it, or fiscal team could have rejected it. So if you guys have dispute as a function, then that could certainly be another status.
So some questions from the webinar. Is there a field for the payment card holder to pay with a purchase order? And, Purchase Order Association is a new function that was, made available about a year ago. And, we'll have to make sure that an enterprise solution provides for that capability. Will there be an option to enter budget coding instead of using speed charts? And yes, absolutely. Is there an option to create a PDF file for the PCL, I think Pcard log, or will that not be necessary anymore? So the intention is that the application itself will hold the information that would constitute the Pcard log today. I mean, that log really just helps bring some context to all the backup documentation that comes along. So really, this system should do that.
Give me just a second. So when Jason was talking through something, that made me realize I can show you from a budget coordinator's role. Give me a second. A function. So as a budget coordinator, and again, this is a roles-based system, so if we have a requirement that needs this function elsewhere, let's say that I'm looking at the 2018 information. That's what the default view is, whatever is the current fiscal year. If I wanted to go back in time and look for information, in this case, I created a record from 2017. So when the system filters it, now I'd be looking at the records from 2017 or 2016 or 2015. The system also allows me to further filter within the year. So maybe I was trying to look for one particular user who had an issue, or I was just doing a random audit. So if I went back to 2018, I might, let's see what Sherry here is doing. As I demonstrated for, I think, the supervisor's view, I can filter it so that now you're looking at my records from 2018. If I wanted to then further filter it for a specific supplier, say I want to look for that files supervisor or that files company, now my records are further filtered to that one supplier. Now I know we had a question in the.
I think I can get it. I was going to ask about section of contract.
Yep. I'll show you in, actually, I'll just show it to you in the view-only mode for the budget coordinator for now. When I'm looking at this record, we have things like, is it MBE or Edge? That's a field here. If it's a state term contract and I were to say yes, then the state term contract number would have been required. If I would have said yes to state term schedule, then the state term schedule would have been required. And in our current rules, you cannot have yes to both state term contract and state term schedule for one transaction. I'm sorry,
They have to manually enter that, and then someone has to go check.
At present, yes. So the question was, do I have to manually enter the state term contract or the state term schedule? And the answer is yes. I, the pay card holder at present, would have to enter those values.
So as a card holder, once you make a purchase with a vendor, then you automatically just go in and put your information in this system?
Once I've selected that vendor, let me now, so the question was how the vendors work. So give me a second here and I'm going to toggle back to a...
Because you don't wait until it hits Oaks, you do it automatically.
The way the system is currently designed, when I, the pay card holder, am holding that receipt in my hand and I come back to the office because we've got basically a 10-day window, then I would be going into the system and creating the record. So it may not be in Oaks yet, but I'm going in and I'm creating this transaction. I'm going to grab an existing record here. So in this case, I was setting this up, I believe, to do a return, but however many supplier names I, Sherry, have entered, that's what you're going to see in the supplier name list for this year. If I were to create a new supplier, then when I save this record, that's now going to be a supplier in my list. I think I heard a question earlier about the admin being able to enter the suppliers. And again, if that were a requirement, then whether the admin role and upload whatever creates the list of suppliers. We design the system so that if particular users, you're always going to Staples or Amazon or wherever it is that you're going, it makes the entry easiest for you, the pay card holder. Question right next door.
I think what she was actually asking is, we approve these before we know if they've hit OAKS, or the charges have hit OAKS.
And you as a supervisor, so the question was the timing of approval. So for example, doing things within the with the transaction log prior to it being in OAKS. And this system is designed, as long as you've made that phone call to Amazon or you've done that web order or you've got that receipt in hand, you can start building this record at any time and save it. You don't have to enter all the information. You might just enter the provider or the supplier name. So it's whatever your process is. When I, the pay card holder, have all the information that's required, that's the only thing that stops me from submitting it, is if I don't have required information. So I would then submit it, and it would immediately be in my supervisor's queue, regardless of whether it's an OAKS yet. Does that answer your question?
If you make 10 purchases at a time, it's really good to get starting on your 10 transactions while you're waiting for the 10 receipts to come to attach. Is that what you use?
Well, it won't process all the way through until it hits OAKS.
And again, our plan is to let the stuff hit OAKS and then bring it over to this system so that we have the exact data. Because JFS has seen some issues where data's not right, or the cardholder thinks that it's, one transaction when the bank actually sends 2 or 3. So we want to, maintain consistent data across the system.
So if the supplier's not in OAKS, we still don't have an issue?
We went up to a point, we spent quite a bit of time on the back end trying to automate this, because that would have been the biggest win for us on this project. Yes, we could process that, all this data could feed back in and back to OAKS, but I think that what, to Jason's point, if the bank transaction came as multiple and you could think as individual transactions, that's where we had data inconsistencies. So we had to put that off on hold. And now that if Jason, OBM takes this enterprise-wide, I think we can look at it in a much robust way and overcome those data inconsistencies.
I have more of just a comment. As an enterprise solution is being considered, if it were something that were mobile friendly and could accept like pictures of receipts, I think it would be a lot easier to sell for people that are in the field, like facilities.
Yeah, I agree completely. I would just say Rome wasn't built in a day, so that may be a phase 2 or phase 3 kind of thing, but, we have to get started somewhere. But I think that's absolutely where we need to get to eventually.
This is external facing, by the way, so you can work from your home as long as you have your username and password. You do not have to stay within the JFS file. So I think that's where we're going down the path of single sign-on, mobile app and all that. But yeah, that's
Question from the webinar. Does the supervisor action reject just return the log to the creator or card holder for correction, or does it cancel the log completely?
It simply returns this to the pay card holder for them to make a correction. We do have a function where the pay card holder can delete records that meet certain criteria. Give me a second to navigate out here. And I don't remember all the business rules we had for deletion, so I'm going to grab, and I don't have any rejected records right now. If I wanted to delete a record, on the far right, there's a delete function here. I would say I wanted to delete this record. The system would prompt me, am I sure that I want to delete that transaction? And then I'd be able to start again.
What if it gets past the supervisor, then gets on to fiscal, and then fiscal rejects it for some reason? Does it go back to the card holder, or does it go back to the supervisor?
So the question from the audience is, when a fiscal team member rejects the record, does that record go back to the supervisor, or does it go back to the pay card holder? The double answer is the record goes back to the pay card holder, so it's rejected from fiscal to the pay card holder. The pay card holder gets an email, and the supervisor is Mamet's looking at me. I can't remember if we have an email that also goes to the supervisor to let them know that a record was rejected. That one I can't remember. But as a supervisor, I would be able to look at my in-process screen, and I would be able to see the status of every record here in the life cycle. This column here, new records, approved. If I had anything that was rejected, then I would see that it was either rejected by me as the supervisor or rejected by fiscal.
Does it show canceled records too?
We don't currently have a status, so the question was about a canceled record. We don't currently have a status of canceled, but we have the ability to delete something that was, say, an invalid transaction, and Mamet, correct me if I'm wrong, it's still in the database. It's deleted from the database at that point? Okay.
Question from the webinar, how are credits handled?
Is a credit a return?
Well,
Sometimes.
I mean,
So the short answer is we currently handle returns. We don't currently have a concept of a credit. That would require more requirement solicitation to understand what requirements go along with the credit. I didn't show you a return, but I do have time. If I were doing a return, so this handy dandy record called Prepping for a Return, if I said I was editing it, and I have to work this record from my work queue rather than in process. In process is view only, work queue is where I'm doing my work. So this Prepping for a Return. Okay, so let's say I decide it's the files, fans, and phones that I'm making a return on. I enter that return amount. A new field became required, which was what is the OAKS ID of the purchase. And this list is customized so that these are the numbers that belong to files, fans, and phones for this fiscal year. And so I would select whichever one matched the return that this was against. So that would require a little bit of research on the pay card holder's side to make sure that they are selecting it. The description field is a required field up here. So that might be part of the training, is enter enough descriptive information so that should you do a return for something, you can match it up as to which one it is.
and also, you know, credit transactions come in from the bank today. We would expect those to be handled the same way in the future. You know, hopefully we're able to bring those directly from Oaks over into the system, and you would just process the credit, or the credit like any other transaction.
Are there any other features that you want me to talk about in more depth or demonstrate again? Question from the middle there.
What's the budget feature do really? Is it a stopping point, or is it view only, or?
The budget coordinator role? Okay, so the question is from the floor is, what does the budget coordinator role do? And the way we've got it currently designed, it's a view only. So it's kind of a safety check. If I know I've got some budget in hand, then it's my ability to go look and say, where do we stand during this fiscal year in the budget? If there were other requirements for what a budget coordinator needed to do, then those would be what you would want to pass to Jason.
A couple more questions here. One, this person's looking for solid information about an interface with Oaks, and at this point, we can't say with 100% certainty that an interface is possible, but it's certainly the road that we want to go down. So more to come on that. And then, what if there isn't a related Oaks ID? There are times we hold a debit when we know there is a credit for the same purchase. I'm not understanding the first part of that, but...
So at present, let me take a stab at it, see if I'm getting this right, and Joyce kind of helped me out here too. So when we set the system up, we said, in order to coordinate information, we absolutely had to have that voucher ID of the transaction that went through. Our thinking was, again, we were trying to streamline development. If I have not yet, as a fiscal team member, sent that debit to the final stage of the life cycle, I would either need to reject the transaction, do something to stop the clock, delete the transaction is really that's how you would zero out the clock, that you haven't submitted it. But once that credit card is within Oaks, then it's the 5-day window before your credit card is going to get shut off. So I don't know if that kind of answers
Yeah, she said
question.
the Oaks voucher ID. So, that would be fine. I mean, we would handle it the same way as we do today. So again, we hope that we can interface the transactions from Oaks over into this system, and so you would have the debit, and then, if you were waiting for a credit, then you'd be able to mark that as disputed while you wait for the credit to come over, and then the credit transaction shows up and you process them both at the same time. Question, is there a workflow diagram available for review?
The shorter version of the answer is, at one time, yes. And I will have to look for my Visio documents to see if we kept it up to date as we finalize the statuses. I can take that as an action item if I'm permitted to, not sure who to look to for approval. If we're allowed to share it with OBM, I can share whatever my last flow chart was about statuses and what happens.
I'll have to check that.
Okay. Sorry, I'm the overly helpful one, so sometimes I want to share information without quite going through the chain, so we'll make sure we go through our chain of command here.
So the budget coordinator role is a few roles, and we have internal auditors that also look at our Pcard office. So I don't know if those two roles have to be separated or not. Just depends. I mean, it could go under, but this just depends on the other agencies, what they may want their budget people to be able to do. But we may need to be in turn, for the auditors, who like to look at our stuff. And then, with the emails, once it's completed, the reconcilers, since we got so many reconcilers across our agencies, I assume it's tied some kind of way to the email to the business offices, because we don't have one business office, we have 30. So.
Okay, so we have kind of two questions from the floor here. I'll see if I can kind of recap them both. We'll start with the most current question, and it's about reconciliation, and her team has multiple reconcilers. Right now, the way the system was set up, because fiscal has only 2 reconcilers, and they break down their workflow alphabetically. So the system doesn't target a specific email to a specific fiscal team member. It sends a general email, and everybody's work queue currently shows all the records. So if one of the reconcilers was out of the office and that 5-day window was counting down, they might choose to help out their peer. More complex requirements would simply require a solicitation. What is it that you need to do to be successful, and then determine if there's a more complex workflow.
Unless they can go in and see a list and it's divided by the department or the institution.
Well, and that's where you could filter it. So the question was trying to make the view easier for the reconcilers to do their work. Give me just a second. I'm going to navigate and go back to my supervisor, who's also fiscal. So with the faster development cycle and easier requirements, oh shoot, and we don't currently have a filter on this screen. Fiscal in process, if I wanted to figure out who my records were, probably the best would be to say, if you said offices and let's say information services, I would send filtering based on those records, and I wanted only those records that had been submitted to me. And I'm not sure if I'll have the right data combination here. And this is a little bit kludgy, but it's the fastest thing that I could show you. So right now, I don't have any that are submitted to fiscal. I have the ones that the supervisors has approved. But let's just say I was targeted to do the one office. I could then generate the report, have that open either on one screen or have it as a background document. Oh, I see. I'm hitting the refresh icon rather than the report icon. So theoretically, I know that I'm looking for these 3 records, whatever my keywords that I'm working from. I would then toggle back to my application. I would go to my work queue, and I would find those 3 records, assuming they really were in my fiscal hands rather than the supervisor's hands. And I would choose to work with those 3 records. And again, this is a solution right now developed for the fiscal team, but whatever requirements you guys have, you would elicit them and see how best to meet your needs.
I may have misunderstood something you said earlier, but once there's a reconciliation, is there an overnight batch or process before you can do the approval?
So the question is, what is the time frame of reconciliation versus approval? And so the answer is that the information does have to be in OAKS before I can approve it, because I'm going to need that OAKS ID and the voucher. So as a fiscal team member, I may say that I've reconciled it, so I've done my first step, and I can save it like that. That's what's going to turn the record red. So tomorrow when I come in, I'll know, hey, that overnight process should have run within OAKS. Let's take a look at everything that I reconciled yesterday. Can I clear those from my work queue by adding the OAKS ID and the voucher and saying that they're formally approved, and then continue with my work for the day, looking at all the new transactions that have come in. Do we have any webinar questions? No. All right, so I'll offer again, are there any other functions that you would like to see in more detail?
With this solution, at least I know first we achieved 80% of your requirements. Again, we could not automate everything, you know, you can only automate so much. And of course, we'll have some exceptions. We try not to make everything an exception. And we are trying to train our Pcard to begin to use the system diligently, or else nothing outside of the system should be walked over to the system. Again, when you look at it from an enterprise level, even from Jason's point, and I'll speak to Jason, understand that every requirement cannot be met, but if we are all on a standardized process, that should help, at least for our agencies, it's putting us in the right direction. And we're also thinking of a phase 2, as Pcard users begin to use, we may have phase 2 enhancements or improvements to kind of see if we can bring any further, you know, automation to this.
And building on what Radha said, so Lean Ohio would try to make it streamlined so that everybody follows a similar process. That doesn't mean everybody is identical in the steps. It may be, again, if you elicit the requirements, you may have conditional requirements that says, hey, if I'm ODJFS, these 20 fields are required. But if I'm Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, 16 fields are required. Lookup lists could be customized based on some value, say, for example, that office. So think about how you do your workflow and think about a streamlined workflow where we tend to think within the boxes that we put ourselves or our agency has put us. So the idea would be, how can we best do our job? And that's what you work with Jason about. Yes.
We have card holders that might be from different institutions, departments. I assume once you go in there at the card, you may see, no matter where you may have moved to. So you might have been at central office, now you're Allen County, their business office. So I guess it really, I don't know how.
So the question from the floor.
That happens a lot.
Sure, so the question from the floor is, I am a pay card holder and maybe I work with, I am in, one institution today or one office today, and then tomorrow I get transferred somewhere else. So the admin role, which I am, but I'm not in as me. Give me a second here, I'm gonna demonstrate this function. So as an admin, this system is roles dependent, and when it comes to the pay card holder role, we have to say which office or, in your case, institution I'm part of. So let's say today I'm part of OIS and I've got a couple of other offices. I'm going to edit my record here. And because I'm roles-based, right now, as a pay card holder, I belong to the Chief Inspector's Office, Fiscal, Information Services, and Unemployment. Let's say tomorrow, now I'm part of, oops, what I was trying to do, sorry. So with my pay card holder role, I want to add more offices. So I would be selecting whatever additional offices I was now part of. And in your scenario, if the admin had built these as the institutions, the admin would go in and select the new institutions. If you've got somebody who's on a statewide rotation, you may say, as the admin, I'm going to select every one of these options for you. Then as the pay card holder, there's a default, I think we still have it as a default value that autofills where I'm purchasing for, which is based on our office of record within timekeep. So I'm OIS. So the system is always going to assume that my purchase is part of OIS first, but because I've been built up with these other offices, I could change the office that I'm making the purchase for.
What if your supervisor changed?
Tomorrow, the system would know it because or actually, would it be real time? So because, so the question from the field is, what happens if today I'm supervised by one person and tomorrow the structure changes and I'm supervised by somebody else? Then the answer is the system would know that I'm now supervised by somebody else. If my supervisor were no longer even a supervisor capacity, he wouldn't have the chance to approve me. But my record would be sitting in the queue of whatever supervisor is approving me, who manages me based on timekeep. And again, that could be changed to Oaks, whatever their supervisory structure is.
Is that based on the date that the transaction was entered? And the reason I ask is if you have a transaction that happened today and you're working for one supervisor and then tomorrow you're working for a different supervisor with a different transaction, is the old supervisor still approving the old transaction?
There are no date dependency rules. So today it would be, right, it's whoever is the current supervisor.
There are no.
Yeah. So if we do go enterprise, because in Oaks you have the HCM and, or however, yes, we may have some of that lag time in between, if the
There's always
transaction.
lag.
So, yes, we'll, and that question came up. Hey, we're not in a perfect world.
No.
Those are all good questions.
Anything else from the web? So I'll keep offering. We still, just because we have an hour and a half doesn't mean we have to use an hour and a half. We've got about 20 minutes left. Are there any other functions you want to see again or in more detail?
Can we do a quick round of introductions now that we have time? Just to,
Sure, yeah.
yeah. If you want to start, from which agency and your name, please?
Oh, my name is Deb Morris, and I'm one of Jason's team members here. So, Becky Allen, Adjutant General's Department.
Monica Walton, Adjutant General's Department.
Jerry Roberts, OBM.
Kathy McIntyre, OBM, project manager.
Stephen Moore, OBM.
Stacey Williams, Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities.
Rick Stoner, Bureau of Workers' Compensation.
Joyce Geis, JFS.
Alice Elaine, Department of Health.
Sherry Wright, Connor, Department of Corrections.
Clifton Connor, JFS County.
Yvonne Gore, Job and Family Services.
Ron Minor, Public Safety, just
Emily Good, Highway Patrol. Michelle Planner, Highway Patrol Services.
Justin Montague, OBL.
Patrick Zeller, yeah.
Andy Slayton, from the Public Defender's Office.
I'm sorry. Anna Garver, DAS.
Ag is mandatory agriculture.
Jackie Lyle, Agriculture. Just Agriculture. Brianna Jackson, Agriculture. Greg,
Renee Ford, DAS.
Thank you, everybody, for attending today. We appreciate it.
All right, again, I'll get scheduled a requirements gathering session, probably 2 weeks from now. Find as many open spaces on calendars as possible to get that set up, and we'll do that downtown, at the Rhodes Tower. Thanks, everybody.
Any final questions?
Nope.
Yeah, sure. So, I saw all the, like the admin roles.
Start out with
Like,